I first met Ashok Gupta in September of 2025 at an integrative health conference in California, and I was just blown away by what he had to say. He is an internationally renowned speaker, filmmaker, and chronic illness and neuroplasticity expert. Ashok is the director of the Gupta program, the original neuroplasticity and holistic health program for chronic conditions such as ME, CFS or chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, post-COVID syndrome, and associated conditions. The program has helped thousands of people regain their lives. His program is backed by solid science, including peer-reviewed studies, and many leading health professionals have also endorsed it. They had a recently published April 2025 randomized control study demonstrates that the Gupta program is significantly more effective than standard medication in improving symptoms of fibromyalgia. And you can find all this out at guptaprogram.com/research. And one of my favorite things about Ashok is that he actually utilized the methods that he eventually developed into a program on himself when he was suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome for years while studying at Cambridge University. And he is now in recovery and symptom-free and doing great. So, all right, let's get to the interview. All right, welcoming to the podcast, Ashok Gupta. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, lovely to be here with you, Paul. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And we, of course, met at the Integrative Medicine for Mental Health Conference in San Diego, California in September. And that was a great time to meet you and learn a little bit about your program. So that was great. Thank you.
Yes, it was a wonderful conference, actually. Obviously, Gabor Mate was there and various other speakers. So it was a great platform for the work that we're doing.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into the work, but I usually like to start with a little bit of the story about essentially your background and how did you sort of stumble upon helping people with chronic diseases?
Yes, well, my story has been a 30-year journey, actually, to get to where I am now. And it started in the mid to late 90s. So I was studying as an undergrad at Cambridge, and I was burning the candle at both ends. So I was working really hard academically, but also like people do at college, university, I was also partying and various things. And I could tell that I wasn't, operating, wasn't fully well, but I could feel that I was just getting through. And I got some kind of virus, and it was like a kind of stomach bug, stroke, flu type virus. Didn't think much of it. And it seemed to go away, but I seemed to feel physically worse and worse and worse. So I became more and more exhausted to the point at which I had to sometimes crawl to the bathroom. I had no energy. I would look at the screen or look at a textbook and not be able to read the words within it, not be able to comprehend what was being said. I would sometimes just feel such overwhelming fatigue, I just couldn't leave the home. And sometimes I'd feel okay. And it was very, very strange. And I would go from doctor to doctor and they would say, "We don't know what you have. We don't know what to call it. We don't have any treatment for it. Goodbye." And for a young man, that's almost like a death sentence. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? And that started my lifelong quest to try and understand these conditions. And in my worst moments, I was almost suicidal. And I made a contract with the universe. And I said, if I can just get myself, a little bit along the way of recovery, 10% better, 30% better, 50% better, I will dedicate the rest of my life to helping people with these conditions, because it is really, really awful when you experience one of these things. And in those days, ME and chronic fatigue syndrome weren't even recognized that much, but now they are more recognized. Fibromyalgia, long COVID, mold, all these mysterious illnesses are becoming more recognized now. And so I was in a bookstore in Cambridge. This is we all can have that moment, that turning point in our lives that really made a difference. So I was in a bookstore in Cambridge because in those days we didn't have such a developed internet. So we were researching things in bookstores. And there was a self-help section and a neurology section. And there was one book that just called to me. And I don't know why, it was just jutting off the shelf. I picked up that book and it was called The Emotional Life of the Brain by Professor Joseph Ledoux, who was the foremost expert at that time on the amygdala, neuroscience in that field. And I read that book and I thought, wow, this gives me some clues as to what might be going on in my brain, because I kind of ultimately came to the conclusion that there's something going on in my nervous system that I couldn't recognize that was causing this illness. And I managed to research, got myself 100% well by, in an ad hoc way, using these brain retraining techniques that I developed, just very ad hoc, and then set up a clinic to treat others, and started then treating a wide range of mysterious illnesses and inflammatory illnesses. And since then, we've done 7 clinical studies, published an app, published lots of other papers, and that's been my 30-year journey to this moment.
Wow, that is incredible. And just curious, because this is sort of an aside from we're going to get into about chronic illness in the brain, plus neuroplasticity, brain retraining program, the Gupta program itself, the neuroscience involved. But I'm curious, just as a therapist in the United States, we have all these like rules about scope of practice, and in the U.S., I'm not sure how it is over in the U.K., but a lot of groups are very territorial about their medicine being the supreme medicine that we must all utilize, and sort of holding back new advances, even at the expense of patients. Although they'll deny that they do that, but that's what I think a lot of people's anecdotal experience is. Can you tell us about when you first started trying to help other people? Did you get pushback from the medical community or other people at the time?
Huge pushback, massive pushback. Yeah, absolutely. Because, we were very entrained in medicine in those days to think about illnesses in very much a hardware problem. If something physically goes wrong with the body, we then find a biomedical agent to try and fix that issue, especially things like fatigue and exhaustion. And so the idea that it was somehow in the brain, people confused that with it being in the mind. So we used to get a lot of hate mail from support groups, from patients, even clinicians saying, oh, you're dismissing patients, you're saying it's in the mind, because we had that dichotomy in medicine that here's the mind, here's the physiology. The two are completely separate.
Right.
And we try to explain again and again, we are not saying it's in the mind, we're saying it's in the brain. Mm-hmm. And the brain is part of the nervous system that is the thing that essentially links our psychology with our physiology, is the nervous system, is the vagus nerve, is all these communication pathways. And as people, it took probably 15, 20 years or 10, 15 years for people to really get their head around the fact that we aren't saying it's in the mind. So yes, we got a lot of pushback from various clinicians and I suppose vested interests. But now, actually, we don't get pushback anymore, which is so interesting that now it's becoming more and more a mainstream idea, and people are acknowledging that actually this may be a viable hypothesis that explains maybe 50% of the conditions we go to see our doctor for.
And the hypothesis you speak of is somewhat around, there's many, because you've published many research papers, but some of it is about inflammation. Essentially, is that what you're talking about? And how that affects pain, energy levels, mental health conditions, but the mind-body is a two-way street. It's connected. I don't know, maybe it doesn't really, it seems silly to isolate an organ from the rest of the body when they're all intermingled and dependent on one another. But that's just how we've studied things in Western medicine for so long. So, so you started learning these sort of techniques, and I know that you're a hypnotherapist, a neurolinguistic programming practitioner, and a breathwork practitioner. And you are, it looks like on your team you have different types of clinical consulting folks from different realms of medicine and healing culture. And I guess, how did you go from helping yourself to creating this sort of world famous program that you have right now?
Well, as I said, it's been a long journey to persuade people that this is an important part of healing. Mm-hmm. And I think that along that journey, what we've learned is about really listening to patients. That I think a lot of clinicians, they don't really necessarily ask the questions, especially in this realm of kind of these chronic diseases. And when we're using a very kind of reductionist methodology to treat it, we're not really asking the patient, how are you feeling? What do you feel is going on? What do you think is contributing? And in one-on-one practice, I really learned to listen time and time again, because the clues are there, which the patient is expressing, that if we don't take attention to that, we're missing the holistic aspect of their healing. And I'm sure, that's something that you see in your practice. And I think secondly is in the importance of this scientific research. So many people now, you can go onto Instagram, there's 1,001 people offering cures to God knows what, but actually having the science, having the studies, and getting those clinical studies has been a really important part of our journey. And how difficult it is to get funding, because most of the oxygen of funding is sucked up by pharmaceuticals, and it can be very difficult to get research. But we found researchers who genuinely care about patients and want people to heal, and therefore have done things on shoestring budgets, made things happen to make sure that we can do the good science on this.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd say that's very difficult to do. So I see on your website, there's all these different studies you posted over the years and research, and it's incredible. And that gets into a whole nother topic, which we won't touch on, which is the motivation of research, the cross-contamination with certain industries and the money machine, and how difficult right now in the United States it is to get anything funded in a grant base. I think it's like the latest numbers I was hearing for scientific studying grants for disease is like a 9% acceptance rate in the US. So not too good right now. So we need some help from you guys. Tell me about why it is that you think, or what you've learned about chronic illnesses being caused, from the brain and kind of spreading outward. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So I think in traditional medicine, we've taken this reductionist idea, and actually those reductionist ideas where essentially, if we can boil every problem down to the cellular level, the biochemical level, and we fix that at the biomedical level, somehow that will cascade up to the whole body healing. That's been the traditional view. And that actually came from the Age of Enlightenment, 17th and 18th century Europe, where religion and medicine and science split, actually. So anything to do with the mind, emotions, that's the realm of religion. Anything to do with the physical body, the atoms, the cells, that's science. And that split is an artificial split and has created a bias in science until this present day. So for me, the way we approach this is the brain has always been a black box. So we can measure hormones, we can measure things going on in the body, but what we can't measure, or what has been so difficult until the last 20 years or so, has been the brain. What's going on in the brain? What do we understand about the brain? And therefore, now as we open up the brain, as brain scanning is becoming more and more effective, we begin to realize, actually, there are so many abnormalities that we see in the physical brain that accompany so many physical illnesses. And therefore, could it be that the brain is not only a processor of what's going on in the body, but actually is causing or contributing to issues in the body? And so to help us understand what causes so many different chronic conditions, so we're talking about inflammatory conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, long COVID. Then we're talking about sensitivity reactions like mold illness, Lyme disease, chemical sensitivities. Then we're also talking about pain disorders, and then even emotional disorders, or what we call kind of burnout cluster. So burnout, anxiety, panic, what causes those types of conditions. And we believe that this hypothesis may explain all of those. And actually, when we look at these conditions, maybe half of the conditions that someone goes to see their doctor for could fit under the banner of it being a neuroplasticity issue in the brain. So I like to start this hypothesis with the biggest question of all: why are we here?
That was a turn.
So, Paul, we could have an amazing conversation for the next half an hour about the meaning of life, and maybe that would be another podcast. But Let's look at it from the science perspective, which is that we are here because over millions of years of evolution, this nervous system and this immune system have learned to adapt to dangers, adapt to the environment, and survive. So we are essentially survival machines, from plant life to single-celled organisms to invertebrates, vertebrates, reptiles, mammals, human beings. We contain all of those adaptations. And many people don't realize this. They think we've just evolved from who we are right now, but we contain the DNA of that lineage. And an interesting fact I learned, we contain 40% of the same DNA as a banana, which is quite incredible if you think about it. And so we've learned to survive, procreate, and pass on our genes to the next generation. So if we're looking at purely at a reductionist level from a Darwinian perspective, we are survival machines so that we can pass on our genes to the next generations. And our system prioritizes survival over well-being.
So and over comfort.
And over comfort. Exactly right.
Just a little fact to give you a break in this presentation, which I agree with all of what you're saying, because this goes very much in line with the trauma-informed, nervous system-informed literature of the last 20 years in psychology. But here's a fun one. Fruit flies, or Drosophila, share 60 to 70% of their genes with humans. 60 to 70% of our DNA is the same as fruit flies. So anyway, keep going.
Yeah, exactly. So it's incredible that we have all of those adaptations, so we can survive, and we are perfectly adapted to this environment. But what's changed now in the last couple of 100 years is we're not living according to our genetic inheritance. So before, we were living in tribes and communities, fresh air, clean water, etc., but we didn't have healthcare. Now, fast forward to the modern day, the last couple of 100 years, we live in boxes, indoors, eating food which has toxins, drinking water that has toxins, around pollution, getting stressed, sedentary lifestyle, staring at screens, comparing ourselves to everyone else on the planet.
Wow.
That is a recipe for anxiety and depression and panic and all the other things that we now see proliferating in society. But also, it's a recipe for these chronic inflammatory diseases which are essentially occurring. So let me give this example. Let's take the example of COVID and long COVID, because we have a lot of people now on the planet who have lingering effects from the COVID infection. When the COVID infection comes along, our nervous system and immune system recognizes that infection and then responds by triggering aspects of the immune system which defend us against that COVID infection. But what happens is, in these chronic inflammatory diseases, let's take long COVID, there is a mistake the brain makes, which is it overprotects, because we've said that the number one priority of our system is survival, not well-being. So it begins to overprotect, and it fights off the virus, but it thinks, I'm not sure if I fought it off completely, so let me continue to trigger the immune system even once the virus has gone, to err on the side of caution to ensure survival. And my question is always to everybody, what turns an acute illness into a chronic illness? So from a physical perspective, what turns COVID-19 into long COVID? What turns worry into anxiety? What turns sadness into depression? There must be something that's going on that's causing these acute conditions, which we all experience, to turn into a chronic condition. And that's the hypothesis that I'm going to share here. So the brain goes to that acute phase, but then makes mistakes and turns an acute experience into a chronic experience, or it believes it's continually being stimulated. And to give an example of this, so I want to use this analogy. I think, Paul, you may have heard this analogy, what I call I used to call it the Game of Thrones analogy, but many of our anxiety patients found that the Game of Thrones was far too violent, so they didn't want to call it that anymore. So we called it the fairy tale analogy, which is a lot of a nicer word. So imagine, Paul, you are King Paul of your kingdom. So you, as Paul, are the prefrontal cortex. You are the conscious rational mind, and your body is the kingdom.
Okay.
Because you're King Paul, and there's a nice ring to it, King Paul.
Yeah, I think I could get used to it.
Yeah, I think you should change your name now to that. So you're King Paul of your kingdom, and you have to protect your kingdom against invaders. So your kingdom is your body. And so you have an army and a navy that defend your kingdom. Just like most countries, they have an army and a navy. So your army is your nervous system. Your navy is your immune system to defend your kingdom. But now let's say your kingdom is weak. It has a drought in the kingdom, and therefore there's not enough resources for the entire kingdom. So therefore, not only is the kingdom weak, but your army and navy are weak, which is the analogy of most people in modern world now are probably feeling they aren't living in their optimal health because of stress, because of food, because of anxiety, etc. Now, imagine an invader then comes along. So over the hill comes an invading army whilst the kingdom is in a drought. Your army and navy now fight. They fight off this invader. This invader could be the COVID infection, could be pain, could be mold, could be Lyme, could be any kind of virus, could be a toxin. Yeah, this is the invader coming over the hill. Could be pain. And your army and navy work really hard to defend the kingdom. But because they are weaker than normal, they have to throw a lot more resources at it. And so they work a lot harder to defend the kingdom. And even once the invader is gone, because they're weaker, they're thinking, I'm not sure if we fought off the invader completely. So to err on the side of caution, let's keep firing off our weapons, our missiles, etc., just in case they're hiding in the forest or they're behind the mountain. Let's keep firing off. And some of those weapons now fall back in the kingdom. So these missiles causing inflammatory effects in the body, causing autoimmune effects in the body itself. Yeah, that makes the kingdom even weaker. So now the army and navy generals think, oh, the kingdom's getting weaker and weaker. We've got to fire off even more weapons of war to defend the kingdom. So now the system is not in homeostasis. It's in this hyperstimulated state. And now opportunistic infections flourish because the spies start flourishing. So we have auto-infections, we have opportunistic infections, we have more allergies, more sensitivities. And the system is just getting weaker and weaker and weaker the more the immune system is taking up the oxygen in the room. And that's what then can cause these chronic conditions. And the chronic condition that you get depends on what the original trigger was. So if the original trigger was pain, you might have got a localized pain in your wrist, let's say. But then somehow the brain makes a mistake and starts generalizing that pain to the entire body, and all the pain networks gets hypersensitive, and then it turns into fibromyalgia or chronic unexplained pain in the body. You may have had some fears, some worries about life in general, but suddenly at a certain point, through repeated worry, through repeated a sense of unsafety in the world, that then can turn into chronic anxiety because that fear has not got processed, or that worry has not got processed. So now the brain learns that we need to hyper defend the system through chronic anxiety. And burnout, a similar process can go on. And therefore, how do we change the situation? Well, of course, we can look at supplements, we can look at diet changes, we can look at exercise. Those will improve the system to try and reduce that inflammation. But ultimately, these Army and Navy generals need to be trained that we are no longer under threat from that invading army that came 2 months ago or a year ago or whatever. And brain retraining is next time the Army and Navy generals have their weekly meeting with King Paul, you say to them, my dear Army generals, Navy generals, you have done a wonderful job at defending the kingdom, but you can stand down. The war is over. And they won't believe you the first time. They won't believe you the second time. They won't believe you the third time because they'll think it's a trick. Why is this king trying to persuade us to stand down? Because we think the danger is still there. But through repetition and emotional intensity, the two aspects of creating new neural pathways, through that repetition, we can create this, what they call safety neurons that come down to certain brain structures, the amygdala and insula, that then train the brain that we are no longer in danger and ramp down those protective responses. So eventually, the army generals are no longer trying to defend the body, and the whole body can eventually come back to homeostasis. And that is this process of brain retraining in a nutshell.
Wow. Yes. Thank you for that illustration and metaphor. And this is similar, and a little bit of a theory to the post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. Usually, a lot of people have it acutely, but then chronic is really when it gets you, when it really gets you bad, when it becomes chronic, because the body is in a hypervigilant state and it keeps sending warning signals, which usually are exhausting. There's nightmares, there's flashbacks, there's instability of emotional affect. What else is there? I'm trying to think of all the things, but basically it's the body overprotecting, right? It's believing, and avoiding things, avoiding thoughts and places, difficulty concentrating, of course, trouble remembering, and it can lead to all these depressive symptoms like guilt and shame and loss of interest and negative beliefs, and it can lead to long-term issues, difficulty sleeping, of course, anger, being hyper-aroused and jumpy. That's just a rough summary of PTSD, but it's because the body goes through a difficult experience, and to keep us, our body does not care about our comfort. It cares about our safety because it wants to stay alive. Exactly. That's the whole idea of the biological mechanism you discussed with the evolution over millions of years, is that we are trained to basically reproduce our DNA and pass it on, or in some capacity to live. Essentially, that's the underpinning of our biology. And thus, your program is trying to get in touch with the biology, and same with EMDR, with PTSD, to help the brain and body and the nervous system recognize when a threat is active and when a threat is not active. The difficult thing I wonder about your stuff is that you're doing this neuroplasticity brain training, which I want to get more into about your Gupta program and get more details about that. But here's some difficulty I was thinking about. So they've had let's say they had they had COVID or they had something, and the brain is now still firing all their resources and all of these, immune responses at something that's gone, right? And now we're getting all these weird symptoms: fatigue, tired, right? What else are we getting? What other symptoms are we having if we keep firing?
Well, in terms of long COVID, so there can be sore throats, there can be swollen glands, there can be difficulty thinking and concentrating, memory loss, post-exertional malaise, so people can't do activities without being completely exhausted.
Yes. Yeah. And so similar, and then chronic fatigue syndrome is also similar, right? It's almost like just continuous chronic fatigue. It's continuously tired. Every little things tire you out. Any other symptoms you could think of real quick?
With chronic fatigue syndrome, very similar to long COVID. So the immune symptoms, the cognitive symptoms, then the physical symptoms, so muscle ache, joint pain, exhaustion in the physical body, and a whole host of different conditions. So mentally, physically, emotionally, there can be all these generalized symptoms. A big one is sleep, not being able to sleep. We see this in a lot of these chronic inflammatory conditions as well. So the circadian sleep rhythms no longer are functioning correctly because the brain's saying, we're in danger. What are you doing sleeping? Right.
And then the worst cycle with that is that if you don't sleep, then there's no time for your cells to rest and regenerate. And if you are into cellular, functioning, as we know, our cells are constantly fighting off free radicals. They're constantly trying to regenerate and give us energy. And this is a very rough thing because I'm not a scientist, but that's kind of the illustration. But I was curious. So we're going to go into the brain training. Oh, do you have a comment? Go ahead. Yeah,
I just want to add that right now the idea of mitochondria function is gaining kind of more and more kind of graft in the industry. And I think once again, there's now this idea that, well, the mitochondria are the core issue here, and the mitochondria are communicating with each other, and they're malfunctioning, and they're the core reason. And I would just even challenge that idea, because I think that the mitochondria ultimately take their signaling and their instructions from the brain. And so they go into what Navajo calls the cell danger response. So they are going into a altered state where rather than functioning correctly and providing energy and oxygen to the body, they now go into a altered state where they aren't functioning correctly, which once again feeds back to the brain that there is something wrong and we're in danger. So all of these happen in cycles where the brain and body are almost playing a game of tennis, hitting a ball harder and harder at each other, saying there's something wrong. So the brain says there's something wrong, triggers the immune system and nervous system. That information via the vagus nerve and other information channels travels back to the brain to say, there really is something wrong in the physical body. And the brain says, you're right, there's definitely something wrong. And that's how, once again, acute illness can turn into a chronic illness, is through these feedback loops from the body and the gut back to the brain.
That's a good way to put it, a feedback loop. And in the United States, we always, in my generation, we had a fun joke. We said, what is mitochondria? It's the powerhouse of the cell, right? And but I do see the obsession. Here we go again with everyone saying, "Ooh, mitochondria supplements. Let's do mitochondria this and mitochondria that." And I've been trying. People have tried to sell me those, and I'm thinking again, that's not the root cause. Potentially, that is a symptom of what is going wrong in the brain. So we have to trace it back. If we just treat the mitochondria and maybe it gets a little bit better, but then it's like, okay, it's still malfunctioning. So what I see you going out with the brain and this brain retraining is to. It seems like you're trying to help the brain and the nervous system realize that there is not an attack. Therefore, they can rest and regenerate and learn to get back into a homeostasis biorhythm, or like a more relaxed rhythm. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. So what I'm basically saying is that the reductionist way of looking at it is that somehow randomly the cells are not functioning correctly, the mitochondria are not functioning correctly, the body is in its altered state. And actually what we're saying is the brain is the master of what it wants the body to do. It ultimately takes in the information, assesses it, and then relays back the information to the body as to what is the appropriate thing to keep us alive, to keep us sane, to keep us functioning. But the brain errs on the side of caution. because of our Darwinian advantage in doing that. And so through that process, that's what contributes to all of these chronic disorders, is the brain over-erring on the side of caution and creating a body which is hyperdefensive versus in a homeostatic state. And the homeostatic state is where we have more energy for the kingdom. So the resources are not going to the army and navy, they're being channeled to the kingdom, so the kingdom can be happy and have parties and have festivals, versus all the resources going to the army and navy being in a siege mentality, firing off their weapons of war. So and that's the battle going on in the body.
Right, and then you have all the symptoms show up, basically, from that. So, okay, let's talk about the brain retraining without giving away everything, because you do have to participate. So you could probably know what's in the program, but if you don't participate in the program, or if you don't work on it, then what's the point? It's kind of like, hey, I know how to lift weights. Well, have you gone to the gym lately? No. Hey, I know how to do yoga stretches. Well, have you done any lately? Well, no. I've been too busy sitting in a ridiculous position that my body was not designed for, looking at the latest hot gossip on the on the phone. So can you? Yes. I'm teasing, but this is like what our modern self finds ourselves doing. Is it's not just junk food, it's junk content, it's junk body positions. I had a yoga friend said, "You're always doing yoga. It just depends what type. So if you're doing a yoga that constricts your spine and your pelvis and puts you in a wrong position, then that's going to be the effect you feel, right?" As of course, we always quote Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's "The body keeps the score," but I like to quote it as sort of a aphorism, like the body keeps the score. Like, did you eat, spicy curry chips last night? Like 2 pounds of those, you're going to feel that score tomorrow, right? Or did you eat greens and grains and have some water? Did you drink, 3 cocktails? And what's the score, right? What do you wake up with the score? So that's my little joke you can use off the title of his book. But with the brain retraining, you've developed multiple programs, I believe, but you have one massive kind of program umbrella, the Gupta program. Can you tell us about that and how this practically kind of does its magic, so to speak?
Yeah, so the Gupta program is a brain retraining neuroplasticity program. And I really liked your analogy of the idea of, reading a book on lifting weights versus lifting weights. They're two different things. And how we differentiate ourselves from, let's say, CBT or psychotherapy or traditional counseling in that way is that, let's take the example of learning to drive a car. Yeah. So you can sit there on your very first lesson and think, right, I'm definitely going to be able to drive this car. I feel really positive about it. I'm letting go of my negative patterns about it. I really understand how it's all going to work. I understand my mind, et cetera, et cetera. But until you turn the steering wheel, the gear shift, the gas, the brake pedal, until you practice that again and again for 10, 15, 20 lessons, the intellectual knowledge of that hasn't been of benefit. So what neuroplasticity is saying is ultimately all therapies and all coaching and everything and all change is ultimately rewiring new brain patterns, new neuronal patterns in the brain. But can we take advantage of some unique aspects of neuroplasticity to accelerate that process of change? And that's where this program comes in, that we say, okay, let's look at those key components. So neuroplasticity involves repetition. So can we take that idea of repetition and bottle it and make it something that clients do repeatedly? Can we take the idea of emotional intensity? So actually we create deeper neural pathways than when there's more emotional intensity behind it. Can we also recognize that actually self-compassion and self-awareness is a very, very important aspect of any kind of human change? Because if we are angry at ourselves, annoyed at the situation, dysregulated, change itself in the brain is much more difficult. So it's looking at all these components of neuroplasticity and how we actually create change in the brain. And then it's split into 3 sections. So the Gupta program is an app where people can watch videos and audios, have weekly webinars with myself. And it's 3 core components. So it's regulating the nervous system. So we know the brain is more neuroplastic and more programmable when the nervous system is calmer. So we use breath work and meditation and relaxation techniques. So that's the first R of the program. But the second R of the program, which is the unique aspect, is called retraining the brain. And that is where we use, first of all, a somatic technique called somatic retraining that we've created, which is, on the back of, the body keeps a score and other aspects, is actually tuning into the body and training the brain to have a different relationship with the physical body. Yeah, so it's somatic retraining. But the core of what we do is something called the 7-step process, which is 7 physical steps that people take on it's not like a twister board you put on the floor, and you step through these 7 steps, and it's kind of viscerally getting the body involved in the brain retraining. And it's literally 2 neuronal pathways in the brain and how we shift again and again repeatedly in order to train the brain that we are safe and no longer in the presence of the original threat. Whether that threat was your boss at work, whether that threat was a partner, whether that threat was COVID, it's all basically a threat detection and management system which is malfunctioning. So we're retraining it through repetition and emotional intensity. And that is the second R of the program. And there's other brain retraining techniques like the accelerator and others. The third core component is what we call re-engaging with joy. And what that says is that it's fine to retrain the brain and get well now, but how do we retrain our brain for the longer term? How do we make sure we stay well? And that's where we use what we call parts. You may have heard it, obviously made popular by Richard Schwartz, the kind of internal family systems. We have our own way of looking at it, which we call parts coaching. And that's where we look at the different parts of our personality and how they impact on our stress patterns so we can prevent them from over-triggering our nervous system in the future. And then we look at how do we go from someone that perhaps has a past of trauma, that is constantly navigating the world in an unsafe way or perceiving the world as unsafe, and therefore in this siege mentality where the army and navy, where all the resources are going, to actually living in a space where we re-engage with our natural inner joy and live a place from where the kingdom itself is celebrating life and is holding festivals and enjoying life versus us being in this kind of siege mentality that the world is unsafe. And that is an important lesson that once we understand that, it can lead to longer term health. Because we can retrain the brain in the short term, but a new condition will come along, a new issue will come along if we haven't got to the core of what is making us unsafe in the world and making us interface with the world in that way. That's the third R of the program. And what's been really a game changer has been not only the weekly webinars, but actually the daily sessions. So we now have daily sessions live on Zoom with our patients for nervous system regulation and brain retraining. And that has been the game changer, because something that's so important, obviously in healing, is co-regulation and being in a community and being around others and not feeling like you're on your own, because loneliness is toxic for the mind and body. And that, for many of our patients, the regularity, the motivation, the idea of healing in community has been so powerful for hundreds of people.
Wow, that is phenomenal. It sounds like you really developed the program out of experience and then, of course, science to back it up. And you go through it in quite a realistic way. I mean, it's interesting because you're talking about all these steps and I was writing them down just for fun. And it reminded me of EMDR phases where you well, actually, people don't like phase 1. They think you shouldn't take the history until you got it regulated. So phase 1, of course, is what's going on because we're therapists and we, of course, have to know what's going on because the state and the governments tell us we need to know what's going on with somebody before we can see them as a client. But then 2 is regulation, which is phase 2. It's just very similar. And then, but the difference is EMDR is a different type of therapy, but you're going just straight up to the retraining, and you're not. This is why it's different than psychotherapy. You're not dwelling in the triggers as much. But I see that you are dealing with the triggers, with the parts, and retraining for joy. Joy is. I actually was talking to somebody about this recently. Was it Dr. Mary McDonald, I believe it was. And she has a book on joy. The Joy Reset, the 6 ways trauma steals happiness and how to win it back, which is really interesting because people don't like the word joy. They say, oh, how cynical of you, how privileged of you to have joy. How dare, like in the world of the chronically online, people, and there's a lot of problems in the world we can now all know about thanks to the internet. That you might have only known about your local problems. Now you know about all the problems, right? So yes. She was talking about that a couple episodes ago, Dr. Mary McDonald, and how to get that back is so difficult for so many people because they actually almost feel guilt having joy. So let's say somebody gets through part 1, regulation, part 2, retraining the brain, physical steps, and you get to phase 3 and people are like, well, Ashok, I can't feeling joy. How dare I feel joy in the United States right now with the way that we're treating people? How do you get past that one? I know that this is a one size fits all, but I feel like it's something important to say on the podcast, because I bet you there's people right now who are about to download the app right now, the Gupta Program app, right on your phone, and they're a little bit nervous about getting to that step. What would you say?
Okay, so this is super, super important. I think that, first of all, in that third phase, we're talking about our own internal patterns that prevent us from experiencing natural happy feelings, natural happiness, natural joy. Right. So when I talk about joy, it's not about saying that this is something around anything to do with the outside world. Right. What it's saying is that we have our own patterns. And it was interesting because at that conference, Dr. Gabor Mate, who's brilliant, talked about the same patterns that we treat at our clinic, which is achievement, the idea that I'm only good enough if I'm achieving all the time. Yes. The idea of approval seeking. I'm only good enough if people are loving and approving of who I am. I'm going to be chronically rescuing and helping others around me at the sacrifice of my own health and well-being. So it's these patterns that, as we become aware of, we realize that we've become so anxious about performing a role from that part to have a sense of self or a sense of love, that we have sacrificed that at the expense of our own innate happiness, that innate contentment. That's what we really mean by re-engaging with joy. Yeah. So that's the first part, is being able to recognize those patterns, release them, and realize that has been contributing to my illness, whether physical illness, mental illness, has been these parts and these patterns which are not healthy for me. They may have been healthy from childhood and resulted from trauma, but they are no longer relevant in the current day. So that's the first part of reconnecting with that inner joy. That's one of the phases. But then the second phase, which is more a philosophical perspective, is how am I allowed to be happy and joyful when there's so many problems in the world? Right?
Yes.
And that really we deal with in a second program that we have called the Meaning of Life Experiment, which is a 30-day journey towards inner awareness and spiritual development. And in that program, we talk a lot about this idea that if we keep focusing on all the bad things in the world, that really is the idea of the kind of the glass half empty. Of course, we will see all of those things, focus on those things, and that's what the brain will respond to. And you hear many people saying, oh, I wouldn't bring a child into the world the way things are today, right? But ironically, that is simply a cognitive bias based upon the information that is fed to our brain. Because compared to any previous generation that's ever existed on this planet, we are healthier, we live longer, we are more educated, we have all the resources financially. We're not going to starve necessarily unless, of course, there are people starving in the world. But, we have access to healthcare. We have access to a society that actually gives us the ability to kind of pursue things that aren't just about survival. And so we are richer and more privileged than any previous generation. And yet, if the brain focuses on what it reads on the 9 o'clock news, then, of course, it will think that this is a terrible universe, a terrible world, focus on the negative, and then convince itself that we're in a terrible existence and therefore no joy and no happiness is justified. It's simply where the spotlight goes. And if we continually put the spotlight on, actually, what is going well in our lives? What am I grateful for in my life itself? Well, if someone gave me a pack of cards, the 52 cards, and they said to you, right, you can either have the life that you have now, or you can pick one of those cards which represents 52 random people on this planet right now. Would you pick one of those 52 cards, or would you stick with the life that you have right now?
You asking me this?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd stick with the life I have.
Right, exactly.
Because I've done a little self-reflection, and I understand that there is a lot of stuff going wrong in the world, but you're right. Lifespans are up. If you look in general at the statistics, humans are less physically violent than they've ever been in the history of mankind in terms of numbers. The problem is there's still problems that have always existed. But I would say if you go into Jungian philosophy, that the same problems, just in a different iteration, that the same human problems we've been dealing with since we had language, or maybe before then.
Absolutely. But the difference is, in our current generations, we aren't just focused on survival.
Right.
So in terms of Maslow's kind of triangle of hierarchy, we have the ability, or pyramid of hierarchy, we have now the ability to move towards higher and higher aspects of self-actualization that previous generations wouldn't have had the privilege to be able to do.
That's correct.
And
yes.
I think that what's happening is, because of the widespread effect of social media and the news, it's so easy for our brain to be blasted with so much information that, because of the negativity bias of the amygdala in our brains, we start absorbing the negativity, the downside of life, and that becomes the focus. And the brain can't handle that level of information.
No.
And therefore the amygdala gets overloaded and we go into burnout, negativity, and anxiety. And therefore, one of the things we really recommend to our patients in that phase of re-engaging with joy is shut off sources of media which are there to trigger your amygdala. They're there to trigger your anxious parts. So that includes social media, which is designed to basically be funny and entertain you, or to anger you, or to polarize you. So let go of social media, let go of the news, because the news basically says, let's take all the worst things that have happened on this planet of 8 billion people, let's tighter it down to make it emotionally stimulating so you stay on the channel, and let's feed it to you every day, right? We're never designed as human beings to take in all the negativity of what's going on in the planet and somehow absorb that and then get on with our daily lives. It's just not what we're designed to do. That doesn't mean we ignore what's going on in the world. Social activity and action is so important, but we don't need to be fed the worst aspects in an emotionally provocative way every day through visuals and sounds, etc. So read about what's going on in the world, but you don't need to absorb it at an emotional level. And I think once people get used to that idea, they realize that actually there is so much to be grateful for. There's so much to be joyful for. And that is the key human aspect of creating our self-contained happiness. That inner joy, that inner happiness can only flourish when we focus on what we do have and the privilege that we have been given as human beings.
Very well said. Yeah. It's an important and almost mature task to take on, to acknowledge that, yeah, there's tons of horrible things you could engage in and look at, and that's true. And at the same time, biologically, we're not wired for this. It will hurt your health, and not just your mental health. It'll hurt all of your health because it's all connected. And thus, how do we balance our need for information and to unite with our communities and social causes and whatnot with the ability to stay or attempt to maintain a level of health that will actually make a positive impact on the world, so to speak? Because if I'm in a state of health and you're in a state of health, that can be transferred to people we meet in terms
Absolutely.
of, at least an example or a gesture or something. It doesn't mean that they don't have to take responsibility for their own well-being and their own health, but it can be a positive impact on the community. So it sounds like...
And on that point, I mean, my favorite quote is Gandhi's quote, although it's now some controversy as whether he actually said it, but be the change you wish to see in the world.
Yes.
That if you want the world to be more loving, start with yourself. If you want the world to be more peaceful, generate inner peace. If you want the world to be more aware, be more self-aware yourself, because everything starts with the individual and ripples out through our communities and through society. So this idea of, dare I use the word, spiritual evolution of our civilization, of our planet, starts with each of us individually being more self-aware of our own patterns, our own interrelationships with people around us, and then that begins to ripple out. And when we see that the challenges on the planet are a simple state of evolution, we as a society are evolving from what we were probably a couple of hundred years ago, which was every man for himself. There were empires, there were countries fighting against each other, completely justified, to the point at which now we become a bit more civilized and realize, okay, actually we want to work together with countries around us rather than invading each other, although there's plenty of invasions still going on. And as society evolves, we eventually get more and more aware and become more loving, whatever. So rather than saying there's so many problems in the world, it's simply a stage of evolution that we are at. And that resilience of society comes from dealing with its challenges rather than trying to get rid of challenges. And when we see that those are the aspects of where we are, we don't then see it as a bad thing. We just see it as, oh, look, society, civilization, we are on this path of evolution from these lower aspects of our humanity, which are every man for himself, fight, might is right, we're all separate, to this idea of we are one humanity, one civilization, working this out. And you know what? One thing that would bring us together, this moment right now, if an alien civilization invaded the planet right now, all the problems of the world, all the separation, all the sense of me versus you would completely disappear, because we would work together for that common vision and that common aim. And I hope I don't hope we get invaded by aliens, but I hope that actually it's this idea that can bring us together as a civilization and solve a lot of the challenges on the planet. Is when we don't see ourselves as separate and every man for himself, but we see ourselves as working together as a civilization to challenge those big problems and work them through.
Yeah, and that does take work, because a lot of people, it's a common to not want to think about us floating in outer space as a vulnerable little blue speck, right? But that picture that I believe it was in the 1950s or 60s, that the first color photograph of the world that was taken from space by like a satellite mission, it changed a lot of people's minds. And I think right now, with all the distractions of technology, it would be important for people to remember how vulnerable we really are, and that it is in our best interest to work and share rather than to feed our egos and our little agendas to have the most power, the most goods, or whatever it might be, or the most fame, or whatever it is. And yeah, you're right. There are less invasions going on now, and now it seems to be, and we'll get into this is another podcast, but I do think that part of the next battle is really between countries is more of a battle for the mind and the soul, because we are finding that, like you said, there are less physical wars being fought and more technological wars. And even right now, the physical wars that are being fought more with technology than ground soldiers, and bad AI war technology, which is horrible. But it does start with us, and so it is a message to us to do something, even if your community is not supporting you, even if you live in a difficult part of the world, a region of the world that has awful inequality or whatever it might be. There are ways to support your nervous system and the people around you, and some of the people in your program are going to make a big difference in a big way, and some are going to make a small difference, but all of it is a difference, right? And within ourselves and within our communities. And I think that's the hard part, is that we need not judge how big the impact is, because who are we to judge that, right? And so I say small. Some people might say, well, I'm only helping my, family here. Well, guess what? That's important. That's important. And that I think this is an evolution as a species thing we're dealing with right now, which is the comparison. Right, we see people, heroes that make a big impact, so we say in our mythology, but others of us don't feel that we've made that impact, and that's okay, because an impact is an impact, right? And I think this is something that gets into philosophy and psychology too much for what the program's going on. But the program, it sounds like you have a second, evolutionary part of the program where you get more into meaning of life. But I love the retraining. And the studies on the guptaprogram.com, GUPTA program.com, showing fibromyalgia scores going down. This latest study in April 2025, 9% in the control group after 12 weeks, 54% reduction in fibro score, sleep disturbance down 63%, 15% in the control, pain down 50%, depression down 49%, and cognitive function improvement 16% in 12 weeks.
Yes.
I mean, it just reminds me so much of just what I call the participation gap. The idea that, like, again, we have the ideas, we know the right things, we might even have the right information, we might even have the right philosophical quotes and books on our shelves, we might hang out with the right people, but if we aren't actively doing it for ourselves, or if you have children, helping them, assisting them in doing it, you will not be as healthy. and in your program, what the repetition and the emotional things, like you say, that cause that pathway to enlarge. So I love it. I'm excited for people to get involved. And I know right now you're working on a new component of the Gupta program, which we did talk about in San Diego. Do you want to tell anybody about that? Is that secret still?
No, we can tell people. Yeah. So So first of all, in terms of the studies that you quoted, as you said, we've got 7 clinical studies now, 6 independent randomized controlled trials, all showing, incredible results. And that study you just quoted was actually comparing Gupta program to Lyrica, also known as pregabalin, which is the default treatment for fibromyalgia. And we were 6 times more effective than Lyrica at reducing fibromyalgia scores. Wow. Now, it's just amazing because someone said to me, if your program was a pill, it would have billions of dollars being thrown at it right now. Because when you ever get a study where something is 6 times more effective than the standard treatment out there? But that's what we showed in this independent randomized controlled trial. So it's for us very exciting that as we do larger and larger scale studies, the bottleneck being funding, because funding these studies is very tricky. But if we can get larger scale studies, then of course we can finally prove that actually neuroplasticity is the most exciting area of medicine in our view and can heal us from a whole bunch of different conditions that traditionally are quite challenging to treat. So that's what I'm hopeful for humanity.
Yeah, I love it. And and it's easy to do. Not everyone has access to therapy. Not everyone has access to a gym. But there are ways to work on your mental health without those. And the Gupta program is definitely one of them, or supplement. So you could be in therapy, you could be going to the gym, you could be eating, healthier foods that have less toxins causing less inflammation, and you can do the Gupta program. So give me a story. I know I'm just asking you for something out of the top of your head that you weren't prepared for, but tell me about, without using names or ages or identifiers, obviously, like a client who enrolled in the Gupta program and was just totally blown away at their results. Can you tell me about a story of somebody?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've got loads of stories actually. Right? The one that really sticks out to me was a gentleman from New Zealand who was 82 years old. Right now, he had fibromyalgia. You name it, he had everything. Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, he had Lyme disease, he had mole disease, and he had it for 30 years. And this had completely destroyed, half of his adult life. And he came across the Gupta program, he started using it. And for us, we were interested because we thought, well, someone who's 82 years old, it's very difficult to differentiate what is coming from inflammatory illness versus what is the natural effects of old age, being in your 80s. So he used the program and he got up to 85% recovery from those conditions. And we were amazed. We thought, well, this is amazing because if someone with that age of brain can still have a neuroplastic brain that he can retrain himself, that means there's hope for all of us. All of us can retrain if an 82-year-old can get their health back. And we asked him, what are you going to do now? You're 82 years old now, but you've now got your health back. He said, I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to do everything that I've always wanted to do because now I have my health back. And I thought, wow. What an amazing story of transformation. That's what we live for at the Gupta program, is we see every day these transformations where people have been paralyzed in their homes, not being able to go out, not being able to live life. And suddenly they can go out and live the life that they deserve. And that for us is really, what we live for. What we do this work for is to see people get their lives back. And we've had people with long COVID, who suddenly have been on, we had a marathon runner. Imagine a marathon runner, super, super fit. And he got COVID and then was on the couch for a year, couldn't get up, couldn't do anything, couldn't exercise. And for him, went into depression. It was really, really awful. And he did the brain retraining and then got back to being able to do half marathons, cycle for 50 kilometers a day, get his life back, get his exercise regime back. And once again, this shows you that these conditions can affect people who actually are in the prime of their health. I mean, marathon runners are incredibly healthy. They can also have excessive inflammation because of the overexertion. But the point is, he had a good physical health, but then was struck down by what goes on in the brain. And that impacts on the entire body. Doesn't matter how healthy your body is, the brain can still have these effects. And yet was able to get his life back and go back to exercising. I could talk to you all day about these kind of case studies and what goes on, but yeah, it's something where when people come across it, it's bizarre to them because they've gone from doctor to doctor for years, sometimes decades, being told that they need to take the right supplements, their labs are wrong, they need to go and take hormone replacement, or they need this. And they've been going from pillar to post, spending thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. And they suddenly come across something which is completely different, all about changing the brain, and seems oversimplified. And yet when they use it and they get their recovery, it's almost, they can't believe it. It's just too bizarre. And that's what we see time and time again as well. Now, we're not saying that having a good healthy diet and taking good supplements and sleeping well, all of those are part of our overall program as well, because those things have to be put in place. But this missing component is what we see in functional and integrative medicine is often missing. And we work now with thousands of clinicians. When they integrate this piece, they see sometimes effects which are 3 to 4 times more powerful than just using the kind of medications and supplements by themselves.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because the supplements can help you, but if the brain is sending dysfunctional signals, then they're not going to be completely utilized properly, I'm assuming, in the energy sectors. I have another analogy for your program, which I thought of, which is it's kind of like when people do like weight training with little weights. They tone the muscles, and then the next thing you know, like I've done a toning muscle program where I've lifted weights, and then like 6 months later, you've been toning your muscles, and then you go to help your friend move or something, or move some things around the office, and you pick it up. It's like, oh, it's so light. And then your other friends are like, oh, I'm out of breath. Ow, ow. And it's like, why are you so strong? Well, and I'm not even that strong, but like, we'll just pretend. Why are you feeling strong and not out of breath? Right? Because I did 6 months of weight training. So in a way, it's so simple that you're training the brain versus just deconstructing. And there's a lot of value in psychology and counseling to deconstruct, and the meaning is so important. But in a way, your brain is like an aerobics weight training for the brain with tools is kind of what I was thinking, because it's like you're strengthening these areas that when then stress comes along in 6 months from now, if you've been in your program, the stress comes along and you're able to maintain a level of homeostasis emotionally. But then there's also all the other components where the systems are firing better. And we see that just from, and I know that you guys involve meditation, but just if you look at the basic meditation studies of students that meditate 22 minutes a day for 3 months, their test scores go up, their sleep scores go up. It's hard science. And that's only one of the things in your program. So I love it. And now you're inspiring me to get back on the horse and join your program.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, what is the new program that we're coming together?
The new program. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You asked me about that. And that's exactly leveraging this research. So taking a step back, the most important study that I believe was ever published in the history of science. So this is a very grand statement, a very arrogant grand statement that I'm about to say. It wasn't one of our studies. It was a study by Harvard, published in 2015, that should have been front page news around the world. What they did was they followed 5,000 people for a year, and they looked at how often they see a doctor or a hospital. They then taught them meditation. They taught them 2 things. One was meditation, so regular daily relaxation. They called it the relaxation response. And secondly, some resilience techniques, which are very basic, but generally how to do general mental resilience, but very basic. The focus of it was really the deep meditation every day. They followed them for another year. There's 5,000 people, and the control group was 20,000 people. There was a 43% reduction in usage of medical facilities, seeing a doctor, seeing a hospital. 43%. That study should have been front page news, because in the Western world, we have bankrupted our societies through the absolutely strong astronomical healthcare costs. And yet here we have something which is free, which doesn't really have negative effects, and is available to everybody, that could reduce healthcare costs by 43%. And yet it's not become kind of the mainstream in society. I mean, I think only about 12% of Americans meditate every now and then. So this is something that we want to bring into society because it's so powerful and so effective. So we've launched this new project called Just 10, just10live.com. And what this is this idea that most of us are so busy, we just need these 10-minute micro practices to integrate into our day. And this is all live on Zoom. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can jump onto our Zoom calls. And on the top of the hour, there will be 10 minutes of exercise. That could be yoga, it could be cardio, it could be strength training. Then 10 past the hour will be 10 minutes of breath work. And it'll be different every day, all filmed beautiful outdoors. 20 minutes past the hour, there will be 10 minutes of meditation. And you can stay on for 20 or 30 minutes of meditation. And then 10 to the hour will be 10 minutes of journaling. So you can just pick one thing a day for 10 minutes to integrate into your life, or you can habit stack. So you could do a couple of things or 3 things or 4 things, depending on how much time you have. And there's also 10-minute sleep exercises as well to help people have deeper sleep. And this is this idea that if we can bring this into people's habits, it becomes a regular thing, easy to access. There's no decision thing of what am I supposed to listen to now? What am I supposed to meditate on? But we can do this together in community, live, 24 hours a day. It then makes it frictionless, easy to put into practice. And that's what Just 10 Live is all about, is these 10-minute micro practices on Zoom in community. And we're rolling that out from January the 1st. So it'll be all about New Year's resolutions, people being able to access this from January the 1st, 2026, and then we'll be ongoing, and it'll be completely free. So the live events will be completely free because we want this to be something that impacts on society, that you're enjoying it. You tell your friends and family about it. They come onto it. You tell your work colleagues about it. We want this 10 minutes to become a ritual that every person on this planet has access to and makes it part of their day. Because that self-care, that mental maintenance is so important in the modern world that we live in.
I could not agree with you more, and I'll be definitely telling a lot of people about this. I also think, and this is a subject of other podcasts I've done, the financial incentives often go against self-care, unless somebody's making money off of it. So, but the money you make off self-care is very small compared to the amount of money you make off disease care and other ways of solving issues. So I love that. Yeah. Just the number 10 live.com.
Yeah, just10live.com. And you can go to the App Store or Play Store and download the free app. So you can just type in Just 10 on the App Store or Play Store, and then you'll see the app there as well.
Okay.
And yeah, it's something where this is about incentives in society. So even the healthcare system in America, I hope that, and Europe, I hope that things start shifting around, and there are people who are working on it to say, actually, doctors should be rewarded for how healthy the population is. Not on how much facilities they use, but how healthy the population is. And this is something that has been talked about a lot, but there's vested interest. But if we could shift the healthcare system to that, then what would happen is actually it would be a zeitgeist change, and we would see populations becoming healthier because that's where the incentives lie. And there has been some talk about giving doctors compensation if their patients use less healthcare facilities, and therefore the doctors have an incentive to say, right, we're going to do cooking classes, we're going to do meditation, we're going to do exercise classes.
It's funny that they all know this too, and we know this stuff works. It's not counterintuitive, it's intuitive if you've been educated enough, if you've read enough. I had to interrupt that because it's like hilarious. You switch the incentive, and the next thing we know, the incentive is to keep people out of hospitals. Well, how do you do that? Besides breaking limbs or a heart attack, it's all lifestyle. Most of the chronic conditions, I think there's, how many chronic conditions are there people dying of in the US? It's like 9 or something.
Yeah, we know that the majority of them, 80% of them, because we used to think, they're genetic. No. 80 to 85% of the incidence of those conditions is based upon lifestyle effects, including cancers, including diabetes, including heart disease. 80% on average is lifestyle changes. Right. And there's 4 main ones that we call under an acronym MEND. Mind, M for mind, E for exercise, N for nutrition, D for deep sleep. Those 4 components of sleep, nutrition, exercise, and mind are the things that basically impact on all the disease incidences that we're going to experience. And if we just do 1 or 2 things in those 4 areas, we can make a massive impact, not only on our long-term health, because those are kind of long-term chronic conditions, but in fact, our short-term health and well-being, our healthy years, and our mental well-being as well. It's so simple. But of course, in society, it's like something goes wrong and then we take a pill. That is just the way we've been trained.
Well, and it seems easier at first, right?
Yeah, it seems easier at first. Yeah, right. But actually it's realizing that these activities can be fun. They can be easy to incorporate. They can be community building. And there were things that previous civilizations always did. So what's interesting is that previous civilizations and societies, they would be out either hunter-gathering or in the fields all day. And then they would, in the evening at dusk, we would, after dinner, we would first of all cook communally and eat communally. Right. And then after dinner, we would sing, dance, and tell stories around a campfire. So we were getting our physical exercise, we were getting our sense of community, we were getting our sense of calming the vagus nerve and through singing. collective singing.
Right.
And this was something that we were doing, and we were constantly exercising because we were hunter-gatherers, we were farmers. And so it's simply taking those components and bringing them into the modern world, just what we're naturally designed to do and what we've always done for the history of our evolution, which is sleeping for slightly longer than we do and having deeper sleep. Basically eating foods which are as non-toxic as possible and as fresh as possible, as natural as possible. Essentially exercising, so having lots of movement versus sedentary lifestyle. And then finally with the mind, feeling that we have a sense of community, feeling there are 4 or 5 people in our lives that we can rely on and go to. So creating those networks, actually doing things for our mind. So previous generations always had their religions or their spirituality, which was a way of people coming together, but also a way of people meditating and breathing and praying together, which we now don't have in modern society. So all of these components are just naturally and genetically programmed into our system. And if we now bring those together and we put them into practice, we will actually live longer, we'll live healthier, and we'll feel happier. And so there's all this, investment and money being put into longevity research right now. We've got to find the magic pill, the magic supplement. We already know what it is. It just requires a bit of time investment, and we can live for longer and healthier.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. It's like these basic things. Like technology's helped us with broken bones and stab wounds and, injuries caused by driving a car, but it has not really elevated the natural things we could do. And in fact, it's distracted from those. So, or can distract, I should say. It can distract if we allow. So I love that summary, Ashok. Okay. Wow. What a great tool. What a great program. And the research supports it. So I love it. And it's accessible all over the world. And you have it in English, German, Spanish, Italian.
Yeah. Finnish.
Finnish?
Yeah, randomly Finnish, yes. Because
I didn't
we did
know about the Finnish program. Okay, well, that's new. But yeah, it's all there. And all over the world. If you speak any of those languages, you can get involved. So there's a free trial as well as the immersive program. And then, of course, we've got the Just 10 Live coming out. Is the app on the App Store yet or just the website currently?
The app's up on the App Store as well. So it's not functional right now. I don't know when this is going to go out, but it will be probably functional by the time this goes out. Yeah.
Lovely. All right. Wonderful. Well, it's been great talking to you. Do you have any last advice for the listener out there?
Yeah, I think my advice would be that whatever challenge you're facing right now, so it could be a physical illness, it could be an inflammatory illness, it could be a mental health condition, it could be a relational challenge that you're facing, it could be anxiety, depression, panic, burnout, whatever you're experiencing, just know that your brain is designed to be your cheerleader, your supporter. It's designed to work with you, not against you. It is neuroplastic. All that's happened is we've trained it in a particular way, which has made it respond in a certain way. And we have the power and the empowerment to train it in a new way so that we can feel the way we choose to. It's simply having the right key to the right lock, the right tools to access our brain, to be able to train it to respond and react and feel the way that we want. So the empowering thing is whatever you're experiencing, you can get through it. You can move through it. This is not forever. You got this.
Thank you, Ashok. Very, very good point. It is not forever. And yes, I agree completely. Thank you so much. I will have all the links in the show notes below. And until then, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
This spring is the one that other springs were trying for, other seasons aim to be. Perfect light on perfect trees, the birds.
And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician Podcast. If you are enjoying the show, please leave us a rating on iTunes or share the show with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. As some of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. I have started a nonprofit with colleagues called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, which is a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators and volunteers so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they may act violently. It is a bold effort to curb violence and save innocent lives by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website at violencepreventionhotline.org. You can get involved by writing your congressperson from our website, sharing it with your network, or even donating to the cause. If you are looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can help provide 20 hours that you need to become EMDRIA certified. Just check out the show notes and send me a message and see if we're a good fit to work together. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians at Health for Life Counseling in Grand Rapids as part of the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. And if you are in the state of Michigan, you can also schedule a telehealth appointment. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon the literature they have read and the experience in their respective fields, the information on this podcast should not be viewed or thought of as the definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please call 911 or the National Crisis Line at 988. Support your local bookstore by shopping at bookshop.org. That's www.bookshop.org. It donates a percentage of sales to local bookstores all across the United States, which I think gives character to our cities and a place to hang out and a place to explore. You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not involved in your local counseling or therapist or social work organization, please get involved to at least pay dues so that we can have lobbyists help keep mental health care accessible at the government level, and also expanding into schools and other places that need it. And also, if you didn't know, counseling organizations and professional organizations are working to keep us from becoming gig workers for a lot of large corporations who are coming in and trying to buy up local counseling agencies or basically pay you what they pay for people to deliver food to your house. So, get involved. Until next time on The Intentional Clinician, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.
Feelings harden into pebbles that I tumble in my pocket as I walk through the gardens at night. We take a bench tour of the gardens at night. I come home along tender in the water and snow. Person in your neighborhood, Katie Lang is a person in your neighborhood, and Benny and his family are in the neighborhood, and all the nuns are people in your neighborhood. Public dreams are puppets in your neighborhood. Someone stole my recycling box in the neighborhood, so I stole somebody else's recycling box in the neighborhood. You go to the ho-ha for cigarettes in the neighborhood, and the firemen shoot the water up in the air in the neighborhood. I gave $50 to this woman, I'll never see her again. I feel like a fool.